Today, we'll be talking to a wonderful author, Joe Talaugon, who has written a beautiful, beautiful memoir called Mestizo Through My Eyes. It's, a personal history. It's part personal history, part manifesto, part love letter, but really a journey about identity and healing and reconciliation. Joe Talaugon, welcome to our podcast today.
Well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate the invitation. To get started here, I kind of want to go back a little bit. And, the reason I started this book was that actually, if you read through the book, it's more of a personal life story. I didn't have to do any literal research anywhere. I mean, everything would just come from my heart and from my own experiences. So I grew up here in Guadalupe, California. It's a little farming town up the coast of California, Santa Barbara County. My father, stepfather, is a Filipino immigrant that came to this part of the country back in 1932. And the reason he came to this part of the state during that period of time in the late 20s and early 30s, there was a very large population and immigration of Filipinos coming to California, to the West Coast to work. So he was one of those recruits that was recruited out of the Cebu in the Philippine Islands back in 1927 and came out here to go to work as a laborer. And that's what he did. He ended up working in the fields because at that time, historically, United States was in a deep depression period of the history. And so there wasn't hardly any work for anybody at the time. But these Filipinos came in a kind of a bad time of the era, and they came right in the middle of a depression. So most of these guys were single young men, like my father, and they went to work in the fields. And he ended up here in Santa Maria Valley. He met my mother, who was a Chumash Indian, and he married her, and I was already a born child with my mother. He's not my biological father, but he still raised me as a baby. I look at him as my father. And he passed away in 1969. And it was a tragedy when he died. I was 39 years old, and he was already 69. And up to that point, I was, just a young man I had gotten married, and I had a family of my own. So I was raising my kids. I married a girl from here in Guadalupe named Margie Cabatuan. We had 7 children of our own. So I was busy in those early years.
Well, the beautiful thing about it is that I'm sorry. The beautiful thing about that struck me about your book is how you painted the picture of Guadalupe, how you really got into the setting. Can you talk about that trip? That I think it's off of Highway 1, right? Guadalupe, that's it's the central coast of California.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about why that particular place is so important to you and so important to the Filipino community, not only the Filipino community, but the mixture of people that you were around as you were growing up?
Yeah, this Guadalupe is right on the main highway 101 coming up from Los Angeles all the way to San Francisco. So it's a farming area. There's many acres of farms. And so during that period of time, the farmers were growing vegetables. And when the people came to this valley, they traveled up the coast from the south, from Mexico up into southern Cal, or if they came from the Philippines, they came from San Francisco down through Stockton and on down the coast. The 101 highway is kind of like a main highway for historically many immigrants, people from different parts of the world travel that road to get to this part of the country, and I'll continue on up the coast. So it is the main stream of transportation. And when my father came here in 1932, there was a lot of immigrant landing here from the Philippines, so that they lived in labor camps, farmhouses, and that's how they kept busy and working. And like I said earlier, most of these men were young, married, single men that settled in the valley. Over the years, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, they continued to work in the fields and established their own families, established businesses. So you had a large Filipino community in Guadalupe itself, surrounding areas like Santa Maria, Lompoc, Rio Grande. All of these were farming areas, so you had a large population of Filipinos throughout those years until today. But in those years, it was more of a more larger community that had a lot of activities going on.
Yeah,
so that's kind of how they settled in this area.
One of the beautiful things about your book is that you really captured the voice. It was almost as if your uncle and your father were talking. You wrote it the way that they would talk it, with the accent and there was something very beautiful and very poetic in the way you did that. Can you describe a little bit? I know that you talk about being a child and the frustration that your father had because of there was a lot of violence at that time. There was economic violence. There was discrimination against the Filipinos, and how that impacted your father and how it in turn impacted you.
Well, it was the time of like I said, poverty, and so the work that he did was for a farmer or a grower. So we lived out on a farm out in the country, and being poor and living in the country like that, they didn't socialize very much with other nationalities. They kind of stuck to their own countrymen that were living in the area. So they would get together on the weekend, maybe on a Sunday, and socialize and speak their own dialects. And that's the only thing that I could remember my father being when he was happy and having a good time when he was with his friends. And he had many friends, and I grew up around these men, and some of them, like I said, established families, but majority were single. And but yeah, they kind of looked for a companionship, either in town in a pool hall, and like I said in the book, many during those times was a time when a lot of illegal activities were going on in the town. I mean, as far as gambling and other activities that were illegal, but yet they continued to do that because the way I wrote about it is, to the Filipino, it was more like a sanctuary to them, because they would get together in these gambling dens or pool halls and barbershops and what have you, to be together with their companions. And a lot of times they go out to the ranch and have cockfights and have sabong out in the
sabong, right? Sabong.
Sabong. Yeah, so that was a really popular activity then. My father raised hundreds of roosters for other people and also for himself. So it was a very popular activity for every Sunday up in a mesa, up in the mountains. They would have a secluded area where they would fight these roosters. But Tony, it's amazing that all these activities were going on, and other people would say they were illegal and against the law and the corruption and all that. Yes, it was, but it's amazing how the authorities turned a blind eye towards them and let these things happen, because the philosophy was in that time was that if you leave the Filipinos alone and let them do their own thing, they're not going to cause any trouble. So as long as there was no trouble, there was no violence. These things went on. And
I think you said that the only time that the authorities would get involved was during election time.
Yeah, that's true. It was very political. Guadalupe had its own, political leaders that knew what was going on, the chief of police and all these people. So whenever the county sheriff would be up for election, he would come around and raid these gambling dens, and then take the money and take the gambling tables out of there and destroy them. Same thing with the chickens up they'd gather up all the roosters and kill them and pin them up someplace. But then miraculously, all of these things might have went away for a few days because of the raids. So they reelected the guy, the sheriff, and say, "Oh, he's a great lawman. He's going to keep the town clean." But the activities would come back around again, and within a week they'd have him running against it. And it was all like I said, they turned a blind eye to it. It was just a political move.
I guess the thing that kind of resonated with me in your story about that when you got to the cockfight, the sabong, was there was the ritual of actually getting that together in a clandestine area. They had to, of course, be in a place where the authorities weren't, but they were, it was part ritual, cultural, but then metaphorically, it was a metaphor for you had the gambling, right? But of course, when these immigrants came to the U.S., that was a gamble itself.
Yeah, it was a gamble itself.
That was a gamble, and as they say, you can't win if you don't gamble, and there's tragedy in that, and there's and then also you can also win sometimes, but you can't win unless unless you do gamble. I know that there was a scene in the book where you were talking about somebody, I guess, who had lost, and somebody pulled out a gun and shot him.
Yeah, that happens. It rarely happens, but this one particular time, they had this cockfighting up in the up in the mountain, up in the hills. But when they have these activities, of course, there's going to be some bad guys there. They'll be drinking or mad because they lost the money. It's going to happen. I mean, so that's what happened. There's one day. I was only about 10 years old that particular day, and I seen this. Like I write in the book, I seen the two guys arguing, and the next thing you know, the gun went off, and one guy was shot. But they took him away, and I don't think he died, but they took him away off the premises, and but things like that did happen. I mean, we can't say it's perfectly nonviolent, because it did happen, but it did. And the thing that I really want to emphasize strongly on this story was that the Filipinos at that time, when they came to America, they were kind of like recruited from the Philippines to come to America. Their propaganda was out that, oh, go to America, the land of opportunity, you're going to get rich, you make money, and you go back home with a lot of money. So they did come, but unfortunately, a lot of those men stayed single all their lives, worked all their lives, and lived out in these camps, and ended up dying in old age. But I think that's a tragedy of the history, is that these men came with the hopes and dreams that they're going to come and get rich and work and go back home someday. My father always said he wanted to go back home, but as the years went on and on and on, his family grew, and he got more settled into the community. He never did go back, and I think that's tragedy of it all, because I know he would spend hours and hours by himself out in the fields, working, thinking about his home in the Philippines. I had the opportunity, fortunately, in 1998, to go back to the Philippines and visit his homeland and talk to his relatives and tell them the sad story. And it was a heart-wrenching thing for me, because I know my father, he wanted to go back, and I think that's why I wrote the book. I think I wrote the book because of the sadness and the tragedy of it all. My father died in one of those old farmhouses that he lived in for many years, and it burned up one night with my uncle, with his brother, and they both died in this fire in 1969. So that was the main point where, in my life, where I began to look deeper into the history and the life of the Filipinos here in America, all of the anti-Filipino attitudes by other people, the harassment. It was just a bad time for them. And then now they got old, and now that whole generation is gone. That first Manong generation is all gone now.
Well, your book is very much a personal journey, but the way I kind of, as I read it, it struck me as a document, a historical document that really speaks to the story of the early Filipinos, the story that oftentimes doesn't doesn't get told, and it's filled with so many metaphors. I just I didn't know where to start when I asked you to come on and do this interview. I'm like, well, geez, where do you start? There was one part of the book, I think, that you were a boy, and something about a horse. You were underneath a horse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What was that?
Yeah. I was we living on this ranch, and back in those days when my father first started working in the field, they didn't have any machines, agriculture tractors and stuff like that. They only had horses to pull the plows and pull the machines in the field. So there was always horses in the barn, and the barn would never be too far away from the house. Well, when I was a little guy, about 4 or 5 years old, I learned to eat. I learned to eat the rice, cooked rice, but I loved the bottom part of the pot, or they call it dukut, the hard part,
Dukut?
on the bottom of the pot.
Yeah.
That's in Visayan. I don't know if you're Visayan, but they call it dukut. So I love to eat that. So I take the pot from my mother's stove, and I went out to the barn and sat underneath the horse and was eating the dukut. And my mother, she was running around screaming for me. Where was I? She found me underneath the horse eating this out of this pot. But amazing thing, the horse never moved, and there was several occasions of close to death incidents, where it was hard living in the old barns and the old ranches.
Well,
Those houses were
you mentioned, okay, that you were eating the dokot, which is the burnt rice, because my grandmother used to do the same thing. She would use the
yeah,
burnt rice on the bottom to make tea. She would make rice tea. But
yeah,
you also mentioned, okay, that was under the horse, but also your tatai or your father had the tuba, right? The wine under the tuba under the sink, right?
yeah,
And I know that you devoted a lot of your memoir about wine, about alcohol, and the impact it had on your life. I know that your father worked the fields, you worked the fields, but you were also a star on another field, a football field. And I
yeah,
think it was at that time where you started drinking because that's what young men were to do, to grow hair on the chest. Can you talk about that
yeah,
tuba and the impact that it had on you, the impact it had on your father, and just what that was like when that was introduced into your life? Because I know it had a profound impact.
yeah. Well, it had a negative effect on me. I was I went to high school in Santa Maria. I was a good athlete. I did have the opportunity to graduate and I had the opportunity to go to junior college. I did go to junior college, but at the time I was about 19 years old, and I was adventurous and full of vinegar, and there's another chapter right there where I hung around. I had buddies that I hung out with, Mexican guys that I grew up with, and so we used to always hang out. But me being the athlete, I unfortunately started drinking beer and wine with them. But I had already tested some of it at home with my dad because he always had wine under the sink. Well, it took a negative effect on me. Uh, I had to drop out of school and never continued on my education, but I did graduate. And alcohol played a real negative part of my life. I almost lost almost lost a lot of parts of my life because of it. But alcoholism ran rampant. I think I wrote much about it in the Native American community, in the Mexican community, and the Filipino
Yes.
community. There was always alcohol around, and it played a real negative role part of our lives. And so the effect of it caused so much heartache and unfortunate times. Alcoholism was running rampant. But I probably could have gone on, but I chose a different path. I met my wife. Met her in high school, Margie, and we got married very, very young. We eloped at 1950. I was 19 years old. She was 17, and we eloped and we got married and we had children. I went back to the fields and worked with the Pinoys out in the fields, which was not a very good choice because there was, at that time in 1950, I did go into the service before I came back, and I was already married, but they drafted me into the service. The service didn't do me any good because although I didn't go to combat or anything, I just stayed stateside and I spent a lot of time drinking with the guys. So that caused another a negative part of my life. So like I said, I came back to the fields, worked in the field with the Filipinos for 2 years when I was married. And then I decided one day they always, one thing about the old Mano, they always encourage us young guys, especially, myself, because they knew me since I was a kid. They called me Mestizo, and then they so they always encouraged me to don't stay in the field, go learn something, learn a good job, get a good job. So I did. I became a sheet metal worker, air conditioning man, and that was my trade for many, many years till I retired, raised my family. But yeah, I learned the trade, but again, alcohol, you read one of the chapters, I finally realized it was ruining my life, it was ruining my family, so I quit at the age of 58. And I've been clean ever since. I haven't, but to the young people, I try to encourage them not to get caught up in that kind of stuff, It's sad.
Yeah, I mean, that's we have a connection because you stopped drinking at 58. I'm 58 right now,
Yeah,
and I don't drink. So I'm glad that we
Yeah,
there's
that's
always
good.
a
Good.
connection. The title itself,
Yeah,
Mestizo Through My Eyes. You have a full chapter on the Mestizo Filipino, the
yeah,
first generation of the Manongs, who the
right.
Manongs are, they were really the first generation of Filipinos to come to the US to work in Hawaii, work in California, to follow the seasons, to follow the crops. And that experience of the mestizo, the half white or the half, the half Filipino, half something else, is something
Yeah,
that doesn't get talked about. And in your book, you very much address the issues and the pain and just the
yeah.
inner turmoil of that
Well,
of being
yeah,
mestizo. So can you talk about why you named the book that, and what were some of the issues being a mestizo? And if you can go into your own background, you're Chumash, correct? Chumash native?
yeah. Chumash native, yeah.
Yes.
That, and the title is Mestizo Through My Eyes, and that it's just the way it reads. I mean, it's through me telling a story through my eyes. I mean, other people have stories. I have my own opinions. I have my own take on what it is to be a mestizo, and it was not easy. I mean, when you're a mixed blood, and some during that time, Filipinos were really being discriminated against by not only the whites but also by the Mexican. There was a constant race discrimination. So me being part Native American, part I didn't have any Filipino blood in me, but my heart was a Filipino. I was raised by Filipinos, so that's all I knew. And so wherever I went, I had this a difficult time of identity. I didn't really identify. I didn't have a solid identity. Didn't call myself. My name is Talaugon, so it sounds like a Filipino, but they say you're not
They
Filipino.
don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So we being mixed blood, and not only myself, but a lot of other guys went through a period of time when they had to choose which side where they want to go. Because being a Filipino at the time, you had what do you call it? Not a syndrome, but people were really anti-Filipino, calling them all kinds of names.
Yeah.
And you didn't want to, you don't want to be identified like, oh, my father's not a monkey, I'm not a part monkey, but yet they did it, and you had this to struggle that, and then amongst your own friends, you had struggle with that. So identity was a big thing. But what I've learned over the years, Tony, that the best way to overcome something like that is to learn about your own ancestry, learn about where you came from, where your grandma, your grandpa, where did they come from? Who were they? And you learn this history. You learn this a part of your life that makes you a full human being. Because if you're out there just wandering around as an individual, and I've seen a lot of them become drug addicts and end up in prison because they didn't have an identity. But learn as much as you can as a young person, if you got mixed blood, who that other part of you is. I mean, you might be surprised. I mean, they can become pride, being proud and having pride of who your grandma was, who your grandpa. I mean, I found out so much about my Native American side of me that it just carries me through my life.
And you know, pride, you speak on pride, which is important because, you know, pride is the opposite of shame. And if you have that knowledge and you have that pride, then, you know, there's nothing to be ashamed of. You know, one of the beautiful things, Joe, that I really love about your book is that it's a personal narrative. It's almost like taking a drive through the landscape of your life down Highway 1. You're making these stops, these different things, these different stops where you're confronting different situations in your different stages of your life. But the other beautiful thing is it's very poetic. You throughout the chapters, you have your own poetry that you've written over time. And if you wouldn't mind, I would just like to read a short poem that's in your book called Mestizo. I mean, unless you want to read it, it's fine.
No,
I mean, I have it in front of me, but this is a poem that you wrote. It's called, you and Margie actually, and it's dated 1974, and it's called Mestizo. Columbus called us Indios. Magellan called us Indios. Adventurous travelers, conquerors. We are Indios. Tribal is our people, culture, tradition, life. We will no longer be conquered. Our riches can never be taken away. We are rich in color and heritage. Our wealth is pride, dignity, and the right to give this to each generation forever.
That's great. That's it. Well, it sounds so, that's pride, that's what makes you proud, you know. And I tell you, it works, Tony. You know, when I learned that I was a descendant of Native American ancestors, and I went to the mountain on the story in chapter 16 when I received my spiritual connection. When I came back to the community with pride, I knew who I was. I could walk into a room with my head hanging straight up in the air and feeling good. But before in the early years, I walked with my head hanging down or I was ashamed. So, no, that's very important history. And, you know, another point I'd like to kind of emphasize here. Yeah, in chapter 16, I do stress the fact that in the Philippines, in Mexico, in these parts of the Western Hemisphere, the Spanish came and conquered these people, subdued these people to slavery, took away their religion, took away their language, took away their heart, the soul. And I think that is part of history that sometimes people don't want to admit to or recognize. I think we accept, a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people accept things the way it was given to them. Religion is good for people. You know, I have no objection to religion, but the way I learned it, as an individual, the way I learned about religion and what it did to my people doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth. And I've never in my life until today, never accepted that. So that's why I want to, you know, emphasize to young people to learn who you are, even though if you're tribal, if you're indigenous, you come from ancient people, learn about it, because that's going to make you a whole person.
And I think that's important, especially now with all of the the anti-Asian hate that's going on,
Right.
the hate in general. And as I was reading through the book, as I was getting to the middle part and towards the latter part of the book, I realized that it's a memoir, it's your memoir, but it's also your late wife's memoir as well. There was a chapter in there that was written by her. And the thing that was so beautiful about it is in reading that chapter, it was a whole jolt of energy. I mean, the book is energetic enough,
Yeah.
but when I got to her, it was almost like just another jolt of energy to get us to the latter part of the book. And I know in your dedication, you did dedicate that to Margie, your late wife. You were 67 years married.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about I know that she had just a tremendous influence on your life. You had 7 children. You both had children. What was her impact on this book? And you talk about her impact on you as a man who had been through a lot of struggles, going through this and that, trying to find your own identity, and what kind of role she played in that.
Well, that's really an important part of the whole story. And when I met Margie, she was a young girl, and we both were young. We didn't have much experience, but I noticed one thing about her. She was really strictly believed in her father and mother as Filipinos. She was a pure Filipina. She believed it. And what really made her more combative, more willing to fight for her rights, was the fact that how her parents were treated when they came to this country. They had a little business in the town. Her father had a pool hall, and would send her out to buy the goods for the pool hall, cigarettes, cigars, tobacco, whatever. And she'd go to pick it up in a warehouse and bring it back. And she'd go order it, and then they deliver it. And one of the things that used to irritate her and make her so upset, when the white delivery guy would come, he'd just be a truck driver. He'd bring the stuff and throw it on the table. And her father was so humble, so so willing to be humble. And she would get mad at her father for being so not subservient or anything like that, but she wanted him to be strong. And I think that's what kept her fighting strong within her own heart to become a civil rights activist, because she's seen that with all her relatives in the Filipino Manongs at that time were having such hard times, and she lived right with them and seen the hurt, the sorrow. And so, but a lot of times when they're very humble, hardworking people, they never complain about anything. They work hard. They might even work a little extra. And that's the part I think she always wanted to, make them become a little stronger.
Well, I know that really came through in her chapter. I know that she accomplished a lot. She was involved in a lot of community advocacy, advocacy. I wanted to also touch on this too. as I was reading the book, I know that there were certain chapters that were written in different time periods or different times. There are most likely going to be writers that are going to be watching this interview. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your process, what it was like to write this? Because I mean, it's just really beautiful how you kind of shift through time, the way you kind of set up the different situations. How difficult was it to write Mestizo Through My Eyes?
You know, to be honest with you, it wasn't difficult because I wrote as I, it took me years to do it, but I would, think about my father's life, or I think about the mono or something. But every time I thought of some part of my life, that part of my life where I was growing up around these Filipinos, I would write it down. So I had these notes written all over the place about the different parts of my life. So as the years went on, and all these short stories and poetry and the actual death, when my father died, I could remember the voice, how he sounded when he called out. Maybe I wasn't there, but I mean, I could hear him calling, his brother calling in time of death. So a lot of this stuff was almost like a dream, but it was real. It would come to me, and then I'd write it down. It was,
Yeah, you know,
it was memory.
It was really,
Memory.
really beautifully written. And, sometimes when you read a book, it's as if the author is trying too hard to be literary.
Yeah.
In your book, it just is. You're not trying to put on any airs.
No.
And the voice is very strong and it's very personal. And it's really as if you're talking to us one on one. You had talked about working in the fields. I guess they called you Sonny. You were working as a dry packer for lettuce. And one of Margie's poems really kind of shook me up, called Silent Tears, where she talks about the workers of the fields. But anyway, I'll just read through it. She says, Silent Tears. It says, Silent Tears. I am the worker of the fields. Migrant worker, they call me. Nowhere in my dreams did I know, America, you cannot see me. America, you cannot hear me. I am on your produce shelves, on your dining table, your fancy picnics and campouts. My most simple dreams were shattered by you, America. I cannot be bitter, for the early years of pain and anguish were all washed away by my silent tears. I shall be gone soon, never known, so never remembered. I shall still haunt you in the beautiful fields throughout this vast country. You will see my legacy to you in the crisp spring mornings and the soft summer dawn. Make no mistake, America, you do not see dew, but silent tears.
Wow.
And she wrote that in 1970, right? 1970.
1970. And
Wow.
every time I read some of those poems, it really emotional. I get emotional. There's another one in there where the men, after work every day, they'd come in from the dry pack field, and they'd stand out on the sidewalk in front of the pool. And when they got too old to work anymore, they did, and the poem is in there. I think it's Passing Time. She'd be standing. I mean, these men would be standing there on the street, just talking to each other, and that was like, she called it passing time, and that's all they did. They only had each other to talk to. It was some of those poems were. We've got several poems more, and hopefully in the future, I'm gonna put together a
You know, that
poetry.
would be a great poetry collection.
Yeah.
Actually, passing time. Yes, we pass the time of day watching, walking, standing around and talking, watching cars passing through, work trucks laden with produce on the way to the markets. We were once part of that world, working, 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 sun up to sundown. Now we pass the time as observers. We are past our prime, they say. So we pass the time observing, walking, talking to one another, sharing our thoughts, sharing our past dreams, hours spent on dialogue of the past that can no longer be had. We look forward to only one thing in the streets, the sunlight and warm friends we know. And the pictures here are really, you know, you have some really just wonderful pictures
Yeah.
of Guadalupe. Tell us about the Guadalupe Cultural Center. I know you've been involved in that. That's something to preserve the history of
Okay.
the community. If you could talk on that.
Yeah. Okay. For all of the years that Margie and I worked in the community, we had moved up to Sonoma County back in 1967. 67. And we got involved with the Filipino community in city Santa Rosa. And so she organized the community there and did a lot of work in the Bay Area. And then as the years went by, she retired, I retired, and we decided to come back to Guadalupe. And Guadalupe, when we came back, we grew up here. We knew just about every family that lived here from the beginning. And she was, she always wanted to have a cultural center, a building where people could come and sit down and talk or meet and get together. So I told her, we'll build one. We'll have one built here in Guadalupe. So we bought this property, old house, right up the street here, and we converted it into a nice cultural center, and it's got a museum and stuff like that, meeting room, sports hall of fame. But then it got too small, so we decided to buy the property next door, and because it was a bigger lot. So, but she had passed away already before she passed away by that time, right? Okay. Yeah. By the time we bought the new property, so we've had this new property about 10 years maybe, and we built a barn building, like a red barn metal building on the building right now, and I'm just getting it finished up. And that building will represent Margie. It'll represent the cultural center, not only Filipinos, but the history of Philippines, the history of the people that settled there in Guadalupe, Japanese, Mexicans, Native Americans. I mean, we want that to represent the history of Guadalupe. And it's her dream. It's something that, I mean, I helped her create the idea too, because I was able, fortunately, I was able to afford to do this, and it made me give me the opportunity to give something back to the community for her. And that's pretty much what it's all about. Because we even have the Ponce chapter meetings there, Central Coast chapter. We have the Oaxacan Indian people from Mexico that meet there, and they do their traditional dances and stuff. I mean, it's just a mixture of people,
So it's a cultural center that's open to a lot of different folks. For those of us, for those listeners who don't know what FONS, as Joe had referred to, FONS is the Filipino American National Historic Society, and there's chapters all across the country. It was founded in Seattle. And so the Fonz, so you're involved with Fonz as well.
Yeah, we have a chapter here. We have meetings every month, and we're planning in October, Filipino History Month. We'll be hosting a cultural day fiesta.
Oh, beautiful!
And
beautiful.
many of the organizations from around the area, Ampo, Roy Grande, Pismo, they all come together and set up booths and stuff, and we have food.
All
So
right.
the building is not quite done yet, but we will be done this year. And anybody traveling through Guadalupe down to 101, when you get to Santa Maria, you just take the Main Street off ramp and drive west 9 miles, and you'll be in Guadalupe.
All
And
right.
you can just go anywhere in town and ask for us.
Well, Joe, I really want to thank you for sharing your journey with us in this wonderful memoir, this wonderful, wonderful book. I mean, I just can't tell you enough how much I enjoyed reading this. I'm going to be recommending this. I think this book should be taught in schools. I recently graduated from Vermont College out on the East Coast, and I've been telling people about this book as well, and they've been putting it on their book lists.
I definitely, I'm gonna promote it more. I do have my website for the book is not up right now, but we're gonna be getting it up and running. So, I want to.
Can people order the book directly from you?
Yeah, they can go directly to me, and I can send. They can do that, right, Karen?
By email.
Yeah, just you got my email. Just they can.
And what is your email address again, Joe?
My email is oldcoyote2 at yahoo.com.
Old Coyote 2, the number 2, right? At yahoo.com. So if you'd like to get the book, the email address to Joe Talaugon is old Coyote 2 at yahoo.com. Again, Mestizo Through My Eyes. It was a real honor to speak with you. This is just a wonderful, wonderful book. And I plan on reading it again. I already read it, but I plan on reading it again. I think it should be in the schools, and it should be out there more.
Well, I thank you for that, Tony, and I appreciate your enthusiastic about it because, being an author, I'm not very experienced at it, but I try my best. It's just something that I want to do, and I'm going to keep on doing it. I'm not going to give up.
The beautiful thing about the book too is that it kind of transcends genres, because it's part memoir, but you have the poetry in there, and then you have parts in there that are like essays, like about the religious genocide. So it's kind of a creative nonfiction type. It's kind of like a hollow of genres, and we're trying to get to the bottom of the pot of rice where it's burnt, and that's where the best part of the rice is, right? So anyway, Joe, thank you so much. We're going to be posting this again. listenandbeheard.net. This is our 3rd podcast. Joe Talaugon, author of Mestizo Through My Eyes. Pick it up. This is a great book. And thank you so much for being with us today.